Okay, under ecosystem impacts, I wanted to add another concept that I find very cute. It's called Nature Makes the Rules and Biology Finds the Loopholes. So biology survives everywhere, as you know, even in the deep lake that's been completely covered in glacier for millions of years under the Antarctic glacier. There is life at hydrothermal vents with toxic waters and very warm temperatures, which is very relevant because when we go looking for life on other planets or moons of planets in the solar system, we need to know just what extreme conditions life can tolerate, right? But on coming back to human impacts, this idea that there are regimes of seabirds, anchovetas, and sardines that are related to so here is the mass in seabirds in 10 to the 6 and anchoveta in 500,000 metric tons and sardines in thousands of metric tons. And the idea proposed was that there are phases in the so-called Pacific decadal oscillation, which looks almost like an El Nino in terms of its sea surface temperature anomaly patterns, but it's much broader and it has time scales of decades and multi-decades. So there was the idea that some large-scale conditions change in such a way that one species or the other is favored. But then it turned out that things are a little bit more subtle. So you remember our El Nino story. During the cold phase, we had anomalous upwelling, anomalous warming, and stronger trade winds, etc. The La Nina, or this is the normal situation. And so this gets stronger during La Nina, and the cold phase players are still the trade winds and the jets, etc., that we talked about for how the rainfall is brought to, let's say, western US. So during the warm time, we said the upwelling is reduced, sea surface temperature gradient is reduced, winds are weakened, so there is a strong positive feedback, and generally we see there are strong warm temperatures, especially for the strong El Niños like 97, 98 and 2014, 2015, 16, 1982, 83. The warming seems really strong across along the, let's say, coast of South America here. And if we remember our basics, when there is westward transport and Ekman divergence, cold waters are pulled up, so nutrients are pulled up, and photosynthesis happens. Then you have phytoplankton, zooplankton, ocean fish, small fish, big fish, and the entire biodiversity, which includes things like seabirds, anchoveta, and sardines. But it turns out that life is always a bit more complicated. So this paper looks at water mass distributions from a few surveys during 1997 September. I think this is yes, September 98, March 98, May, August, November, and 99 February, and it basically shows various water masses along the coast of South America for these cruises. So you are here looking at central coastal water, cold coastal water, superficial equatorial waters, superficial subtropical waters, and superficial tropical waters. Superficial, they mean near surface. So the idea is that even though there is large-scale El Nino going on, there are pockets of complicated water masses that are surviving or making a circulation because the wind variability here is not steady. It's varies on daily to weekly to monthly time scales, and so even though there is a large scale El Nino going on, small scale water masses survive, and The idea is that they looked at catch data on anchovetas, mackerels, sardines, and proposed that there are indeed temporal and spatial loopholes. So if you think El Nino is the nature's physical rules, where we talk about trade winds weakening, upwelling weakening, sea surface temperature gradient weakening, winds getting further weaker, upwelling getting further weaker, warming, and so on. There are these tiny pockets of waters with appropriate temperature, salinity, oxygen, nutrients, etc. for some fish. Others cannot survive. So this is called a loophole, and there are many examples of such loopholes. There are details on how fish look for regions where they want to put eggs so the eggs don't get dispersed, and there is enough food when they hatch and become larvae, and there is not enough predation to eat them away so that many of them survive. All these kind of cute details are there in biology, but in general, the adage or old saying is that nature makes the rules and biology finds the loopholes. Can we extend this to human impacts? Yes, human beings are now beginning to affect biology also in this kind of process of nature's rules and biological loopholes. So the increased greenhouse gases, polar amplification obviously is warming the Arctic, reducing sea ice extent, and spring melt and fall onset being delayed, number of open ocean days increasing, giving light into the ocean. And remember, it's a cold ocean, so nutrients are available because there is a lot of mixing, and when sun comes up, if there is open water, there can be shallowing and phytoplankton bloom. So this shows change in annual net primary production in percentage per year, and you can see there are large parts of the Arctic Ocean and even Labrador Sea and so on where there is significant increase in annual net primary production. This looked at some data for I think about 10 years or so. It's not that important for this story here, and this is the correlation coefficient of various factors of lengthened open days and sunlight available and so on. But essentially, human activities are changing circulation, they are changing temperatures, they are changing sea ice cover, and so on. And what does it mean? So that is also beginning to change the entire food web. So these are the I think humpback whales, which are found with all kinds of injuries, lots of them dead, and the injuries and the predation are consistent with attacks by orca, the killer whales. So killer whales are not going into the Arctic when there is a lot of sea ice cover, but as sea ice cover is decreasing, orcas are going further and further north into the Arctic, and they are attacking other whales. We talked about potential of narwhals being replaced by killer whales. So here is an example that documents how killer whales are coming into the Arctic more and more and attacking other whales. So clearly an indication of how biological systems are exploiting the loopholes, but this time the loopholes are being artificially created by humans as opposed to natural variability over long times. Sardines, anchovies, mackerels, whales, everybody has adopted to these natural variabilities on evolutionary timescales. So then the question is how quickly they adapt when changes happen. And this is one example of just migrations, but there are also examples of species selection changes and so on and so forth. The other good example of biological loopholes is the life that is being now found more and more on debris that is being put into the ocean by human beings. I have podcasts coming up next on plastic pollution and human-made materials. Anything you put into the ocean becomes a FAD, fish aggregating device, as I had mentioned when we talked about Argo floats and why they are kept way below the surface to avoid biological growth on them. So if there is enough light and phytoplankton, barnacles and other things can grow, you can see that immediately life begins to take hold. In fact, this idea has been used to create artificial reefs in many places, and it works. Okay, it cleans the waters because these are filter feeders, shelled clams, oysters, various other things that remove pollution and excess nutrients and so on, create habitats, increase oxygen and so on. So here you are finding various pelagic species living on these great garbage dumps in the open ocean, and also the coastal species where coastal pollution is providing new habitats for things to grow. So the great garbage patches that I talked about that happen in the subtropical gyres because they are convergent regions, we had already identified them. So those are the garbage dumps in the world's ocean, and you can see here an example of a boat that was pulled out and how many things have grown on it after it was abandoned, sank into the shallow waters and so on. And here is an example of floating debris in the open ocean and the artificial reefs that get formed around them. Okay, so nature does make the rules in terms of how circulation responds to radiation changes, whether it's because of natural causes or anthropogenic causes. And then circulation changes, upwelling changes, temperature, oxygen, nutrients, phytoplankton, zooplankton, everything happens, but biology always finds these little niches, and this is important because it may mean that such decadal time scale low frequency changes are not necessarily related to large scale changes in circulation, atmospheric patterns, Pacific decadal oscillation and so on. So these are large scale patterns, and changes happen on interannual time scales, and Pacific decadal oscillation has similar warming pattern but has a much broader spatial extent, and it has multi-decadal time scales. But the decadal variability in these things may be happening on such small scales. So if you have a decade with more El Niños or more La Niñas, then anchoveta or sardine may be preferred, and then that affects seabirds and other things, mackerels and whoever else that feeds on anchovetas and sardines. Okay, so I hope it's clear how complicated and things get when biology is involved, but also that there are unintended consequences of what we do. So dumping garbage in the ocean, especially the things that float, can create biological systems. Is this a good thing? Of course not. Overall, this kills more larger species than creating a food web. But artificial reefs are different. They are hard materials. You can dump old train cars, for example. They are not going to be floating. They can be sitting in the coastal waters and creating artificial reefs and a local ecosystem, increase fish biomass and so on. Whereas these kill things as opposed to creating a little biomass that goes with the biological loopholes. Okay, so let's leave it here and then go to the tipping points in the next podcast.